So for over the past 2 years, US allies they have followed American orders on almost everything. From the oil price cap to seizing Russian assets, they have complied. And their reward was economic pain and higher inflation. The big question is how far will they go? And this is about to be tested very soon. The US is pushing their sanctions to the next level, and it now involves the biggest chip making suppliers in the world. Back in March, the US Commerce Secretary gave everyone a warning that the US would do whatever it takes to contain Chinese tech. The biggest chip companies in the world have already complied and they have stopped selling to China. The most advanced semiconductors and chip makers are already off limits to Beijing, but the US wants a complete ban on everything now. The Biden administration wants Tokyo Electron from Japan and ASML from the Netherlands to cut trade with China. You can't sell chip making gear and you can't service their machines either. And to make this happen, the US is ready to impose a measure that will destroy their allies' industry and eventually it will boomerang back on US technology as well. The FDPR or the Foreign Direct Product Rule could be slapped on US allies, and this rule allows the US to impose controls on products made using US technology. This is an absolutely insane measure. So, if Japan uses hardware, software, or any other American input to make their products, the US could block Tokyo from selling their goods to China. If this becomes a reality, Japan and the Netherlands will have a big problem. Their economic sovereignty will be at serious risk now. If they accept this ruling, Japanese and Dutch supply chains will be effectively controlled by the US. It might be China today, but the restrictions can apply to any other country in the world tomorrow. If the US doesn't like X, Y, or Z, suddenly you can't do business with them either. It's a real slippery slope that will crater their economies and is already having a material impact. Within minutes, the share prices of both companies collapsed. Tokyo Electron was down by 7.5%, ASML crashed by 8%. Over $600 billion in value just evaporated into thin air. So if you're a shareholder of these companies, well, you just got screwed. The US itself is now a big geopolitical risk. Remember, these aren't Chinese or Russian companies being punished. These are corporations in the EU and Japan, part of the G7 themselves. The FDPR is essentially a Trojan horse for the US to exert trade control around the world. If it comes into play, other industries beyond semiconductors will be affected.
What we seek to do is ensure that certain technologies, where the United States is ahead and where China's explicit strategy is to have these technologies and deploy them in the Chinese military apparatus, those are technologies that we have used export controls to ban the sale of to China. So we enjoy trade with China. The vast majority of trade with China is in benign products, and that will and should continue. So this isn't about decoupling.
Chip companies might be the first wave. We could see export restrictions on virtually anything and everything made with US technology. And this might include energy products, chemicals, and computers. The US could target other critical sectors like 5G tomorrow, who really knows? Thankfully, countries aren't that stupid, at least we hope so. They have seen what happened last week and the disastrous election debate. Adopting Biden's policies is like boarding a sinking ship. More importantly, if they hop aboard the sanctions trade, entire industries would disappear in a hurry. There's no getting around Chinese money, the market is simply too big here. Since January, ASML has stopped exporting their high tech chip gear to China. But one look at their sales and it's really obvious decoupling is impossible. In Q2 this year, revenue from China has flown up. It's over 2.3 billion euros, and that's equal to the US, South Korea, and all other markets combined. China accounts for 50% of total earnings. Ironically, the sanctions forced Beijing to order even more equipment from the company. And the sales here are actually from older chip making gear. In contrast, the US only brings in 3% of revenue for ASML. It's really ridiculous. In other words, you have a tiny customer, telling a company to cut away their biggest source of revenue, and this doesn't make any sense at all. Will the Netherlands follow the US to the grave? Will they collapse ASML to pander to US foreign policy? I think not. No sane country will do that. How about Tokyo Electron in Japan? Now it's just as bad. China is their biggest customer by far. In their latest quarter, China accounted for 47% of total sales, bringing in 217 billion yen of revenue. Since the start of the year, Beijing has been buying more chipmakers from Tokyo Electron. Imagine the disaster if Japan bows to US sanctions now. They will be kneecapping their own industries. China might even retaliate and become more self sufficient in chip making tech. Chip companies all over the world, they now have to make a choice. Do they continue to sell into China or stop using American technology in their production lines? And either way, this will cause disruptions, but one is more existential than the other. Not using US tech will be an inconvenience at best. Odds are Japan and the Netherlands will continue business with Beijing and replace US machines with Chinese alternatives. Biden's policies have truly gone too far this time. Does the US policy of containment even work? Does it make sense to destroy the global chip industry to contain one single country? No, it does not. The former ASML chief executive Peter Wenick went on the record. He mentioned how US sanctions are a complete waste of time. It won't stop China at all. Isolating China will be hopeless. It will only force the country to ramp up their innovation. There are 1.4 billion Chinese people, and they will come up with new solutions no one has thought of. And this is coming from the global industry leader in chip making tech. China has the brain power, and they have the STEM graduates. And thanks to cheap Russian energy, Beijing also has affordable energy to power the R&D. And let's not forget the supply chains in rare earths. China dominates those as well. So obtaining raw materials isn't really a problem. One such innovation is a light-based semiconductor developed at Tsinghua University. It's 3,000 times faster than NVIDIA's leading AI chips, the A100. More critically, the Chinese chip consumes 4 million times less energy. Imagine the applications this can bring. This is innovation. Chinese scientists, they've gone from 0 to 1, and what's left is to bring this to the commercial market. And do you think Beijing will sell this to the US after all the restrictions, after all the punishments slapped on them? Many US chipmakers are afraid of expanding the sanctions on China with this new foreign product rule. They are terrified that Japan and the Netherlands would become defiant and stop cooperating in R&D. US companies might have a big head start today, but tomorrow is not guaranteed. China is pouring in much more money and will close the technology gap within a matter of years. If the FDPR goes through, ASML and Tokyo Electron would either collapse or break away from US tech. Either way, it will be a defeat for American chipmakers like Applied Materials. It will be a victory for China, who have no competition left. This chart shows us the capital expenditure Chinese foundries make in relation to their sales. Chinese chip companies like SMIC reinvest a ton of their revenue with government subsidies as well. Their capex to sales is around 80 or 90%, which is an astounding amount, far higher than the US or even the Taiwanese foundries like TSMC. China developing high-tech chips is inevitable, and when that happens, the next move would be to replace their domestic market with locally made chips. Western semiconductors won't exist in the Chinese market, there will be no need now. It's crazy if you really think about all the chip sanctions. Does this make Western semiconductor companies stronger or weaker? Instead, you are encouraging China to build complete self sufficiency. They learn nothing from the EV industry. The playbook for chip domination has been set, is written in stone, and China is simply executing the plan. It's not just the Dutch and Japanese companies on the hook. Applied Materials, a US company, will get hammered as well. 40% of their sales comes from China. They still sell legacy products to China and they might be next on the firing squad. Here's the problem. Applied Materials also has many domestic customers including Intel and global chip makers like Samsung. They sell chip making gears to these companies. Cutting away Chinese revenue will crater their business. The cutbacks will be brutal and innovating ahead will be virtually impossible. And this will ingrain a deeper dependency on Chinese chips. The Department of Defense commissioned a study recently, and they found that 40% of semiconductors that sustain US weapon systems are sourced from China. In other words, Chinese suppliers are helping to build the US MIC and maintain their weapons. It's really bewildering, it's hilarious all at the same time. The Ford class is America's newest aircraft carrier, and they rely on over 6,500 semiconductors sourced from China. Other classes of military hardware all require thousands of chips from Beijing as well. Think of how crazy this is. The US is borrowing money from China to buy Chinese made chips to arm their military against China. It's a real challenge to even say this in one sentence and really make it make sense because this is the exact opposite of decoupling. If we zoom out and we look at the supply chains of Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and General Dynamics, it's even funnier. Chinese suppliers provide the materials used to build US missiles like the Tomahawk. The electronics alone, which includes semiconductors, comes from over 400 different Chinese suppliers. And these are purchases made by the US government themselves through all these defense contractors. To supply Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel with weapons, the US needs Chinese chips to make stuff. And that's how integrated China is within the global supply chain. US companies desperately need Chinese suppliers to function, and without them, industries and even the military wouldn't function. The chip ban aims to cripple China's semiconductor industry. However, this latest move will only hurt their allies. And when allies like Japan can't supply the world with advanced gear, Chinese companies will come in and fill in the gap. US allies like Japan and the Netherlands and even Taiwan need to understand the end goal of US economic policy, especially when it comes to chips. It's not about friendshoring, it's about reshoring production back to the US. Companies like ASML and Tokyo Electron are competitors to US brands like Lam Research and Applied Materials. Gina Raimondo has made this crystal clear, and every manufacturer in the world really needs to hear this.
See, we believe America shouldn't just be the end of the supply chain. We're tired of being the end of the supply chain. We want to make advanced semiconductors right here in the United States of America, right here in Malta, New York. And that's why the president put his back behind the Chips and Science Act, and that's why this act became law, and that's why we are here making a once-in-a-generation $50 billion investment in semiconductor manufacturing in this country.
America's end goal isn't in the best interest of Japan or the Netherlands. Raimondo is looking out for the US, which is the right thing to do as an American lawmaker. And hopefully Japan and the EU realizes this and they look after their best interests as well. Cutting away the biggest semiconductor market will only hurt your own chip companies. It won't really impede the ultimate progress of China, it will only destroy your own chip industry to help US foreign policy. It's a really lose-lose proposition, but let me know what you think. Will ASML and Tokyo Electron cut China away? And can this get any worse? This is like a horrible Game of Thrones drama. Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.